Welcome to the 2020 Hope Global Forum's annual meeting, America on Reset, Healing a Nation, Opportunity for All.
Welcome to this track of the Operation Hope Global Forum Straight Talk segment. I'm David Gardner, and I'm really excited to be joined by the three friends of mine, going to be friends of yours here in the next half hour or so. We're talking about increasing access to investing on this track, and I'll just briefly introduce myself as the co-founder of the Motley Fools. So we're a company that is here to make the world smarter, happier, and richer. We started 27 years ago by trying to teach anybody who'd listen to us that the stock market is a good thing to learn more about and become a long-term investor in. And I'm happy to say our business is still going 27 years later. I also want to introduce my friend Alexander McCoben. Alexander, you are the CEO of Conscious Capitalism, and I'm so excited to have you with me. I'm on your board, so is John Hope Bryant. We're big Conscious Capitalism fans, and we're going to be learning a lot more about Conscious Capitalism in this time. Alexander, good morning.
Good morning, David, and good morning or good afternoon whenever people are listening to this. It's such a pleasure to be talking to the Hope Global Forum again. It's been a couple of years since I was there, and I'm thrilled to be talking about conscious capitalism. And I think we want to get started by actually talking about what that is as a frame for the rest of this conversation, right, David?
That's right. We're gonna be talking about. We're gonna introduce conscious capitalism because we're gonna assume not everybody knows it. I sure wish everybody did, but part of what we're doing, Alexander, you and me, and really Jennifer and Olin, we're all conscious capitalists, is spreading an awareness that business is a great force to elevate humanity. I know John Hope Bryant feels just the same way. That's why he's on the board. Before we start in with that, though, I want to make sure I also introduce Jennifer Gennaro Oxley. Jennifer is the executive director of the Motley Fool Foundation, which you'll be hearing a little bit more about later as we talk about increasing access to investing. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you, David. So happy to be here with you and everyone else.
And also Olin Douglas. Olin, who's been with me at the Motley Fool for something like 20 years and counting. Olin, these days, after having been our chief financial officer for about 15 years, you are now running Motley Fool Ventures, which is our venture capital wing. So Olin, welcome as well.
David, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be on any program with you, and we've done maybe one or two in the past 2 decades, but I'm sure this one will be the best ever.
Well, and thank you, Olin. Let's go for it. 2020 is the year of virtual conferences, so we're so sorry that we can't be there in person with all of you, but it's also very special that we can access these talented guests. I'm not sure we could have flown Alexander all the way in from California. So it's in a way, it's wonderful that so many people can be hearing us, that we can be all with each other much more cheaply than ever before. So there are silver linings. Well, let's get started, Alexander, talking about conscious capitalism. How about the high level explanation?
Conscious capitalism is a way of thinking about capitalism in business that emphasizes the human nature of these endeavors. It starts from the premise that capitalism and business are good because they create value. They're ethical because they're based on voluntary exchange. They're noble because they can elevate our existence as humans. And they're heroic because they lift people out of poverty. And it's a way for businesses to fulfill their own potential as human endeavors by operating with a higher purpose than just maximizing profit, having full stakeholder orientation to find win-win-wins for every stakeholder group, conscious leadership for the leaders of companies to embody their values, and conscious cultures where everyone can bring their authentic selves to work. And we'll talk more about what each of those are soon enough, but what I also want to emphasize is what conscious capitalism is not, because people hear this sometimes and have some misconceptions. So I want to be clear, conscious capitalism is not about having a lower profit or revenue in order to do good in the world. It's a way of actually increasing profit by doing good in the world for others, finding the intersection there. It's not CSR just writing a check after the productive process. It's about doing good the whole way through running your business and making a profit. It's not a marketing strategy, it's not political, and it's not a checklist of businesses needing to do these 20 things. It's a set of values for businesses to be run on that really is intended to fulfill this higher purpose of business benefiting everyone the company touches.
Thank you, Alexander. That is a wonderful um, recitation of a lot of the truths that we hold to be self-evident as conscious capitalists, people who know the great power of business for good in this world. Now, there are some businesses that aren't very good. We don't need to call out any bad players here, but they make the headlines, the Enrons of the world. And sadly, it seems, Alexander, as if they often can dominate people's impressions. If you're reading If It Bleeds, It Leads, and it's bad news and it comes from business, people start thinking that capitalism isn't good or doesn't work. But there are four foundational elements to conscious capitalism, and I thought it would be helpful for us to go through them one at a time. I'll say for us at the Motley Fool, this first one, which is higher purpose, has been so important. We've been a purpose-driven company. I wouldn't even say for all of our 27 years, but I'd say for at least the last 15. And I don't think I did mention at the top, but the purpose of the Motley Fool is to make the world, I did, smarter, happier, and richer. And I can't say it enough, I guess, because purpose and being driven by it really changes how we think about business. So could you speak to that first foundational element, Alexander?
Absolutely. And I really do want to call out what you said before, that even if the media focuses on the bad actors in business, there are so many good actors out there and positive examples of conscious capitalism in action. And the Motley Fool and Operation Hope are two great examples of it. That's why I'm just so thrilled to have you and John Hope Bryant on Conscious Capitalism's board, because we need those positive examples to provide a path and an inspiration for others to go on this journey as well. And it does start with the purpose of a business. Most people think that business is all about making money, maximizing profit. And conscious capitalism doesn't say that profit's bad. It's really good, it's important, but it's not the end of business. It's a means to serve a higher purpose of creating some kind of greater value in the world, and just recognizing that you make decisions in order to fulfill that purpose and use profit to get there rather than the inverse. And I think the Motley Fool and Operation Hope have great examples of that.
Well, thank you, Alexander. And there are so many examples. In fact, I'll say that this has been very helpful for me because my full-time job at the Motley Fool is picking stocks. And so I think all the time about the purposes of the businesses before I pick them. I'm much more likely to pick a company that has a really positive purpose and an expansive vision. That's the stock that I want to own for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And indeed, it's worked. It's worked really well for us at the Motley Fool. So one of the things I love to do is just go to a company's website and see if it's stating its purpose up front, and then see if it does, do I feel like that's authentic? Is that company really living that purpose? And it's really helpful, especially if I have a friend or two that I might know at the company, or you can meet people online these days through LinkedIn, all kinds of ways to see if people feel that their company really is purpose driven. So Alexander, it's one thing to state it, it's another to actually do it. The second of 4 different tenets or foundations of conscious capitalism is conscious leadership. Now, I see this every day at the Motley Fool. Jennifer and Olin are, for me, examples of conscious leaders, people who understand that leading with love, which is one of the chapters of the new book, Conscious Leadership, by the founder of Conscious Capitalism, John Mackey. That book just out this fall, outstanding book on conscious leadership. But I see people who bring their authentic selves to work, show vulnerability, are there to create a win for everybody around them, and many of the other traits of conscious leadership. So, Alexander, what does conscious leadership mean to you, and why do you think it's one of the 4 foundational tenets of conscious capitalism?
You touched on a lot of the components of conscious leadership already, and so I'll just emphasize the point that conscious leadership is a way for leaders of a business to integrate the 3 other tenets of conscious capitalism: the higher purpose of the business, the stakeholder orientation, and the culture they want to see in their company, in a way that not only brings analytically intelligent thinking to the business, but also emotional intelligence, again, understanding the human nature of the business, and then systemic intelligence, spreading that to not just a handful of individuals, but dozens, hundreds, thousands of stakeholders that the leader touches. And even then getting to a spiritual intelligence, not necessarily in a religious sense, but in a sense of the actual spirit of the company, the values it embodies, and bringing that love, compassion, and empathy to the work in order to help every person that the company touches really be their full authentic selves.
And these are words people don't necessarily assume would be used in a business context. Love and compassion, and some of these really important human traits that we want from all those around us throughout our lives. For some reason, we think that you need to check those at the door at a lot of businesses. I will certainly say not at our business and not at many conscious businesses. Now, the third tenet, Alexander, is conscious culture. Could you explain a little bit more about that? And then I want to start welcoming in some of our other voices. Olin, I'd love for you to share, after Alexander lays out a little bit about this, an example of conscious culture that you've seen.
So, conscious culture really is about the ethos, the principles and practices underlying the social fabric of a business, something that permeates the atmosphere of the company and connects all those stakeholders with each other. Every company has a culture, but not all companies are intentionally developing that culture to promote their values and purpose. And when we think about conscious cultures, we really think of ones that are tactile, that have trust, accountability, caring, transparency, integrity, loyalty, and egalitarianism. And this isn't just some woo woo idea. Bain and Company recently had a study that found that 70% of business leaders agree that culture provides the greatest source of competitive advantage for businesses. And they do vary business to business. I can say that when I got a tour of the Motley Fool by you a couple of years ago, I could feel the culture just from the way that everyone was interacting with each other and the structure of the company. And it does pervade companies that are very intentional about what culture they want to develop.
Olin Douglas, you have been a big part of the Motley Fool's culture for 20 years running. One of the things that you do around this time of year is you usually rock some of the best Halloween costumes that we see in Fool HQ. And I'm sorry that I won't get to enjoy that this particular year, but could you maybe tell me what you're going to be for Halloween? And then more importantly, what about conscious culture for you?
Well, thank you, David. I'd like to say that what I do for Halloween, I like to keep secret until the last minute, largely because it's almost always a last minute decision. So it's not really secret. I just don't know yet. But I would imagine that given the COVID and the separation, I think I will try to do something special this year. And somewhere around October 28th, I'm really going to put my head into figuring out what to do. What I would say, when two examples I can give you of how conscious leadership has affected the venture fund that we launched. Um, the derivation of it, or the origin story behind it, if you will, was our CEO, Tom Gardner, many years ago, looking at his leadership team, uh, knowing that he wanted to grow the business. And instead of convening a meeting where he tells everyone what to do, what he basically said was, I'd like to take an allocation of $1 million, give that to each of my senior leaders, and you go off and tell me what you think would be a great idea for us to explore. And then I came back with an idea of investing in private companies and effectively got permission to run that as a pilot program for several years before we actually launched the fund. But that conscious leadership of saying, looking at your senior leadership team, saying that I don't have all the answers, and really leveraging your resources to help grow the business, I think is very much something that's at the core of conscious leadership. And the other story is about a guy named David Gardner, who it was the first LP in the fund, and which is a huge vote of confidence. But it came with specific instructions um, that I do remember, and I try to honor every single day, which was have fun, make money, and grow the brand. And that was the only instruction I had. And that kind of confidence and faith is really great. And it gives you that opportunity to grow and explore. And my personality, I think lots of people at the Fool, is that when given those opportunities, the freedom actually becomes this incredible responsibility that you have to make good on the opportunities that you're giving. And I think that throughout the organization, whether it's unlimited uh, time off and sick leave that has always been with the Fool. I think it's fairly common now, but back in 1995 or whatever, when we did it, it was unheard of. But I think the Motley Fool has been rewarded time and time again by trusting its employees, even beyond what people think is normal.
Well, Alexander McCobin, the employee, is a really important stakeholder. There are many stakeholders that surround enterprises of all kinds, Operation Hope, the Motley Fool, and the wonderful enterprises of so many people watching us right now. Yeah, there's the customer. There's also, of course, the employee. We talked about that, we just did. How about partners and suppliers? Um, the community, maybe the environment. For each business, Alexander, it's a creative decision to decide who are your stakeholders, but integrating them, that's another thing altogether. Could you speak some about this fourth tenet of conscious capitalism?
The fourth tenet of stakeholder integration or stakeholder orientation is really about getting past a zero sum mindset of business because very often, too often, when we think of business, we think in terms of trade offs. That if you're going to benefit your shareholders, you have to somehow take away from employees or customers or suppliers. Or if you're going to help your suppliers out, you're harming your customers. And really, business is about finding win 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 solutions where you're able to benefit every stakeholder at the same time. Often, this requires greater creativity or time to think through the approach to make that happen. But it's an imperative for businesses to think in terms of finding those win-win-win solutions where every stakeholder benefits from the business's productive activities. And this is one of the unique features of conscious capitalism, but also something that's core to business and capitalism that we really shouldn't forget. And there are so many stakeholder groups that can benefit when a business thinks creatively and thinks about how to align all of their interests with each other.
It is that win, 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 as you've said, Alexander, so much at the heart of good business. And really great businesses have done this for decades. There are many exemplars, and often they're smaller companies. They don't make the headlines, and a lot of them are watching us right now. So thank you for all the good work being done by so many out there every day to create wins for all of your stakeholders. And I think that's probably the favorite of the four tenets for me, Alexander, of conscious capitalism, is that notion that we're here to create wins for everybody. We're here for each other, and we can make everyone win. And frankly, as a stock picker, the businesses that do that, those are the best stocks too. This track that we're talking about, increasing access to investing, we're going to be getting into that more now in the second half. We're going to start welcoming in my friend Jennifer, who's been very patient listening to us talk about conscious capitalism. But I did want to just talk a little bit about, increasing access to investing. I mean, the Motley Fool started there by offering a free website. That's what we've done for a long time to try to make people clear about what the stock market is and how to invest better. But Olin Douglas, investing takes many forms, and a more specialized form that certainly some of our viewers right now understand and participate in is venture capital. And you're talking some already about Motley Fool Ventures, our venture fund. But we're a golden rule driven organization. We do want to treat others as we would wish them to treat us. Olin, as you thought about how to launch Motley Fool Ventures, you got that mandate from our CEO, my brother Tom Gardner, to go out and be fruitful and multiply. What was the unique or surprising, to me anyway, angle that you took to start Motley Fool Ventures?
Well, thank you, David. And again, it's interesting in the story of the venture fund. I have lots of these kind of directives from people, which are very short and very broad, but having been around the Fool so long, they're so meaningful. And from Tom, he was saying, well, what I don't want to do is launch venture fund number 645 out of 646. He said that's uninteresting, and we can do better. So as we thought about the typical venture capital model and our strengths and our assets and our challenges, we're a new venture fund. I was a CFO. I wasn't in venture capital, so we have a new fund manager. We didn't have a lot of connections into the institutional venture investing world. And so instead of trying to climb that uphill battle, and quite frankly, there are not a lot of VCs that look like me as well. And so instead of climbing that uphill battle, what we said was, let's turn that model upside down, which is things we love to do at the Motley Fool. And instead of trying to find that big institutional anchor investor and then some smaller people to find it and have a small number of people writing large checks, why don't we, like I said, flip that around and get relatively smaller checks from a lot of people that we know, and then create a community with them, and see if we can learn and grow together. And it's been really exciting. So where your typical venture fund can have is as low as one investor, and typically average is probably 20 or 30. We have close to 800 investors and what's in our fund. And what makes it really special is that all of our investors are either members of the Motley Fool community or they were recommended by a member. But no, those were the only two ways to get into the fund. So we have this exclusive fund, which is like 40 times larger than any others. And it's just been a great experience in community, in the power of working together to do good and do well.
Well, and it has been a spectacular start for the venture fund. Of course, it's still so early on. We can't conclude that we're geniuses yet, Olin. We're going to see how these companies do, right? Venture capital, like most good investing, plays out over time. But such a promising start, and from such a strange place when you look at the industry, because most venture funds are trying to have as few limited partners as possible, and for them to write as big a check as possible. As you mentioned, we have reversed that. So we have better parties. I think that's fair to say. When you have 800 people coming to your venture fund party, it's going to be a lot more fun than 10 guys with checkbooks. So thank you so much for that, Olin. And I think about the importance of well, let me just turn it back to Alexander one more time. Alexander, for us at the Motley Fool, we realized we could do a lot of things for profit. We could give stock picks. We could help you find a better credit card, find a better interest rate. That's the Ascent, which is a big part of our business. Many of you, I hope, will be familiar with that, looking for better interest rates out there. We could open up a venture capital fund. That's a good way to make a profit if you do it well. But some things, as it turns out, some aspects of increasing access to investing really, I don't think, can turn a profit. And yet they're still so important. In fact, they're more important than anything, because the only way you ever get investors is to teach them how to save and help them, sometimes with systems and philanthropy, to do that. Alexander, what are your thoughts in terms of philanthropy and the role that it might play within conscious capitalism? Is it part of conscious capitalism, or is it outside of it?
So it's important for people to recognize that philanthropy is not all conscious capitalism is. That you're not a conscious capitalist if you just write a check to a charity each year, or if a business does that. But philanthropy and nonprofits are just as much a part of capitalism as for-profit institutions are. And so many conscious capitalist businesses do incorporate philanthropy in some way into their strategy, even as you were saying, identifying how it connects with the purpose of their own business from the get-go. And so the kind of work that the Motley Fool Foundation is doing, I think, does integrate with a conscious capitalist approach to business investing and what you're doing. So conscious capitalism is not just philanthropy, but philanthropy can be a core part of a conscious capitalist approach to a business. And David, I think the Motley Fool Foundation is a great example of that.
Well, thank you, Alexander. We started with an initial hypothesis, and now I get to start talking to Jennifer. Jennifer, as you came on board as our executive director, we had this hypothesis that since at the time we were saying, the Motley Fool's here to help the world invest better. But maybe starting our foundation, maybe its purpose should align with that, but be to prepare the whole world to invest. So if our company for profit is trying to help the world invest better, what about preparing the whole world to invest? So as you came on board, Jennifer, that was kind of pre any research. That was what we were thinking about as the purpose of the foundation. Could you reflect somewhat on what you have learned and what we've been learning since those early days?
I would be happy to. There's 100 different ways to start a foundation. Many people that are listening to this call, myself and others, have experience creating philanthropic efforts. And I think for us, it was important that we kept two things in mind. One, the community approach, the conscious approach about purpose being aligned with where we're going and everything we're doing. And the second is that we need to do something that's unique to the Fool. As Olin just noted, putting the community first, flipping it around on starting a venture fund. We need to do something. The Fool is known as being a trusted advisor that does things a little bit different. And so we needed to be looking at it from that perspective. Why are we doing this? So we started our public charity in February of this year. It's not officially launched until 2021, but we did that for a couple reasons. One is to uncover the truths. What's happening in the world of finance today? What's happening for people like you and me, others across different demographics? What is their financial status? Who's making progress? Who's being held back? What are the barriers? We want to uncover the truths. We want to approach it intentionally at looking at our own bias from a conscious perspective as to how we are helping people move forward or potentially holding them back. And we also thought to ourselves, how do we make the most impact and not talk about these inequities and the challenges that certain people face for another 100 years? How do we dig in and do something about it? And the timing right now, with COVID showing the underbelly of so many financial issues. I mean, just the lack of savings, the challenges with systems and otherwise that are potentially not set up for success for everyone to take advantage of these wonderful opportunities. I think it was time for us to dig in and to really think intentionally through a 5-phase program to launch the foundation in a very conscious way. So what did we do? We created a forming task force, and our forming task force has been our family. The nice thing about COVID is everyone's available for a meeting. So we've had 4 members of the Fool community, our members themselves, 4 staffers who we call Fools, and 5 people from the communities we might serve. So we've been very fortunate to have Elaine Hungenberg for Operation Hope. John Hope Bryan is one of our advisors. Marla Blow from MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth. I could go on and on. But the 12 of us looked at 10 different segments of society, largely focused on the US. Everything from women to retirees, Gen Z, Black Americans, other nationalities, immigrants, millennials, military. We come to find out when you're in the military or out of the military, retire, it's a very different financial situation for you. So what we wanted to do was look at the themes across all of these demographics. What was happening in their life financially? Where were they? Were there unbelievable advancements? Were there just the truths about the blockers? What was happening so that we can then, as a foundation and a public charity, have the most impact, figure out, do we need a broader purpose than we initially thought about? And what is it that we can do uniquely as the Fool with our unbelievably cool position of being in the middle of corporate America and individuals who want financial stability and having so many years of success, shifting mindsets where individuals see themselves as investors, even if they're just investing $100 a month, but they see themselves being able to pay their bills, but also start to develop wealth. So it's been an exciting ride. And fortunately for me, I've been able to work with Olin and David and all these forming task force members the entire time. We're at the end of our initial research, and now we want to share with all of you a little of what we found. And then from there, we're going to have another phase called acceleration, where we meet with more and more partners to figure out how we can make the most impact in a uniquely foolish way.
Really well put. And, I love games. Anybody who's looking kind of that way could see that I have a lot of games in this room. So I know we settled on one of my favorite metaphors for how to think about this important world. But, what I really love about what you're working on, Jennifer, is it's not just about financial literacy. We don't have this sense that you can just go in and teach kids about money and how to write a check and how to buy their first stock. Those are important, but really it's the system that has to take needs such a hard look taken at it, especially here in 2020. Could you unveil the game board and explain what the heck we're doing here?
Yeah. One of the challenges in a COVID world is creating a philanthropic effort where you combine heart and mind. So how did we, once we do all of this research and we figure out what the ahas are, how do we actually bring a picture to that we can live? And this is what we came up with. So one of our illustrators, who's brilliant, came in and said, it's like a Chutes and Ladders game. And short raise of who has played Chutes and Ladders in their lifetime. And it's not meant to trivialize the process or what we're all going through. Again, it's just meant to help us see the picture of the path that there is to progress and the barriers that can hold people back. And as you may remember in Chutes and Ladders, when you land on a certain piece on the board, you either take a ladder straight up towards the finish, or you hit a chute and you go all the way back down. And it is somewhat about luck, somewhat about understanding the game. So here's the board. So we have not unveiled this before. And again, this is just a second phase of our work together. And what we're going to do for a few minutes is run through the board here. I'm going to ask Olin and David to also contribute throughout. But again, this is like Chutes and Ladders. And the goal at the end on the top left is to talk about financial resiliency. Yes, financial stability is important, but we want people to be resilient. Again, where are we right now in 2020 with COVID? We have found that even people who thought they had enough to be resilient do not. And so there's a goal for us to be in this space. Okay. So on the bottom left, you look at the different demographics that we researched, women, people of color, otherwise. And you look at really what is happening. And what we found is the reality of the game is that, and I want to just say this, look, most of what we found was not rocket science. It wasn't something we all knew. But when you're working with a lot of different stakeholders that really want to do good, you got to find a way to pull them all together. So we're seeing something we all believe in. And what we came to here is that through all the research and 50 interviews with amazing influencers and John Hope Bryant's team, et cetera, it really, not everybody has the same shot. And I think we know that. So whether it's the isms, the racism, sexism, et cetera, that is holding someone back, but there is, if you move past that, if you're able to get past that, then the first thing you see here is a locked door that's right next to a ladder that shoots you directly towards financial resiliency. And that can be, you will potentially have the opportunity to go through that unlocked door and have an easier path if you have certain privileges. And it could be, or certain connections. So if you come from a family of entrepreneurs, if you come from a family that has money, if you come from a family that values education and is able to actually put you in a system that moves you forward regardless of your background or race. So there are ways that people and privileges that people have to actually be able to walk through that door and have an easier path up those two ladders. Doesn't mean we're not working hard, and there aren't a lot of bumps along the way, but in general, getting through that first door is sometimes easier based on who you are. Okay, we move to the next phase. So we're on the bottom left of the board here, and we see this wall. This wall has a lot to do with the education opportunities that there are out there and the education attainment gap that is real. And so what you see here is there are times where you end up in an education scenario where you have mentors, you have teachers that are amazing. They help you over the wall. They help you to keep going. So you go along the board here and you get to what the next thing is, which is the system, right? So even if you get past this, you get a decent education, you're moving forward, then you get to, I want to apply for a credit card. I want to apply for a home loan. I want to have good credit to be able to move forward. And I'd like Olin to talk a little bit about what we found here around the challenges that we have about the systems.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I really agree with a lot of what you're saying. And when you talk about the systems, one of the things that we found is to really navigate the system is to understand how it works. Who are the folks that are, in the organizations that are influencing the decisions made? Who are the ones that are kind of affected by or otherwise kind of working within that system? And generally what we found is that those barriers do exist. It could be as simple as having that access to credit, whether to get a good credit rating. In this society that we're in now, credit is the form of concurrency. And if you don't have access to a credit history, it can affect your ability to buy a home, buy a car, do the things that actually help you move through and be upwardly mobile. And a lot of the changes in the system some may have, some may not have been intentionally barriers, but they have over time developed into things that are barriers. And so as we try to combat these problems, we looked at what are the organizations that we can work with? What are the issues that we can try to address to help to remove some of these kind of institutional barriers that don't necessarily have a person behind them anymore? They're just processes that are put in place that are having unintended consequences that just aren't being addressed.
So moving on through the board here. So we've gone through, so you've made it over the education wall. You know, you're dealing with some barriers and or opportunities, as we've seen in the market recently, around companies that have committed to making change in this space. So we're moving up the wall, and then you get to a cliff. And the cliff could be, I've lost my job. I have a death in the family. Or I'd like David to talk briefly about something like COVID. What happens in the market? And how do people feel and deal with something like a COVID, especially if you are invested in the market?
Well, thank you, Jennifer. And I'll just say briefly that, an emergency fund is something that we have talked about from the beginning of the Motley Fool. And the way that I define that is 6 months worth of living expenses. So I think that is for a lot of people, especially young people, that should be aspirational and their first main goal as they are thinking about saving money from their first salary check is build up that emergency fund, because you never know what's going to happen. And boy, was I not predicting COVID in 2020. Most of the world wasn't. And so financial resiliency, your big theme here, and the end of that game that we're going to try to help as many people reach as possible. You have to have an emergency fund in order to make COVID happen and survive and be resilient through it. So thank you.
So as we're rounding the corner here, just a few more points. You know, on the top, you see the lifeline. And really what we did is take a hard look at social and human capital and how those networks, mentors that look like you, feel like you, have had successes, actually unlock financial freedom in many ways. So you're going through all of this, and I think what's pretty apparent to all of us wasn't that, again, this was surprising, but what was interesting to us is how really hard it is and how perilous the journey can be in many different levels. It also showed us the opportunities for change. So towards the top of this, you see our friend here who is in front of the serpent, and that serpent really is the difference between being able to have a very small savings and pay your bills, which is wonderful to pay your bills, and build wealth. To be able to see yourself, have the agency to see yourself as that person that can actually build wealth and be in a position to do so because the system and yourself, it's all allowed you to be there, and you've worked hard enough to be there as well. So I think we also, when we look at all of this, it is inspiring to us. It is sobering. There are many truths within this. Many unlockers out there and many straight up barriers that we need to be addressing. In the end, it fell in three buckets. The buckets to financial resiliency are access, and that's the systems that Olin talked about. It is mindset, it is agency, it is education that we talked about earlier, and it's straight up money in the end. Do you have the opportunity to make a living wage, to get a good start when you go through the process? And like our purpose to make the world smarter, happier, and richer, is the path of financial freedom must include all three of those buckets, which is access, mindset and education, and money itself. And when you have all three of those, not separately, but you have groups like the Fool, like Operation Hope, like others that are working together, and whatever we do, we have those three in mind, we feel that could potentially unlock some of these barriers and give people a path to freedom.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. That was an outstanding talk through the game of life, the game of financial resiliency. Alexander, I want to tie you back in here as we begin to close. What do you see as you look over the game board? The first half of our talk was really about conscious capitalism. After halftime, we really went strong on financial resiliency. Can you help us tie those two together?
I love this game board and everything that you and Jennifer and Olin were talking about, because it really is about the barriers to achieving a conscious capitalist system that we face right now. The barriers to us having that deeper understanding of business and capitalism as fundamentally human endeavors and relating to each other as humans. What the game is laying out is the challenges to finding that win-win-win solution when so many people have a win-lose mindset still, and there are barriers that impose a win-lose framework onto the system. That if we really want conscious cultures in our businesses, we want everyone to bring their full authentic selves to work. And more people are recognizing now that that's not the case for far too many businesses. And the only way we're going to unlock that is if we have higher purposes and conscious leadership in companies that are driving those home. So I really appreciate how this is actually providing a framework to remove those barriers, as you're talking about, Jennifer, so that people are able to be fully authentic and live within conscious companies and a conscious capitalist system.
Well, thank you very much for that, Alexander. And, I think about John Hope Bryant and how he really represents the head and the heart. And he understands the importance of business, how critical it is that we do it well for our future and the future of our kids. Well, I want to thank my wonderful guests and friends, and now your friends too. Alexander McCoben, the CEO of Conscious Capitalism, Olin Douglas, the Executive Director of Motley Fool Ventures, and Jennifer Jarnara Oxley, who is the Executive Director of the Motley Fool Foundation. And each of you have helped me see better how the world can work and should work. And Jennifer, to think you were talking about access and education and capital and money, all three have to be present, just reminds me of what a big dream and what a lot of work the Motley Fool Foundation has in store for it. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this track. I hope you've enjoyed my guests. I sure have enjoyed this time with them and with you. Thanks a lot for being with us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and that you're enjoying Operation Hope's annual meeting. As we say at the Motley Fool, Fool on.
Thank you for attending.
I do when my love is away? Does it worry you to be alone? How do I feel at the end of the day? Are you sad cause you're on your own? I can't find a little help from my friends. Oh, I'm gonna try a little help from my friends. is away. Does it worry you to be alone? How do I feel at the end of the day? Are you sad cause you're on your own? I can't buy a little help from my friends. Oh, I'm gonna try a little help from my friends. What do I do when my love is away? Does it worry you to be alone? How do I feel at the end of the day? Are you sad cause you're on